A small wooden disc, shaped like a flat loaf of bread, carved with strange symbols, buried in the sand for almost 4,000 years. When archaeologists pulled it out of the desert near a forgotten Egyptian fort, they had no idea they were holding the most important piece of military history ever found. Because this tiny wooden disc wasn't a coin, it wasn't jewellery, it wasn't a religious charm, it was a ration card. A real, government-issued ration card, used by Egyptian soldiers in 1850 BC. That's 1,000 years before money was even invented. That's 3,800 years before the US military created its own ration system in World War II. This is the story of the world's first ration card, the wooden bread token that fed the most disciplined army in the ancient world. Let's go back to around 1859 BC, Lower Nubia. Today, this is the border region between modern Egypt and Sudan, but back then it was the wild frontier of the Middle Kingdom Egyptian Empire. Pharaoh Senusret III had built a massive chain of military fortresses along the Nile to protect Egypt's southern borders from raiders and rival kingdoms. These weren't small outposts, they were huge stone fortresses. Some had walls 30 feet thick, some had towers as tall as 5-story buildings. They were filled with hundreds, sometimes thousands of Egyptian soldiers, stationed for years at a time. And every single one of those soldiers had to be fed, every day with perfect accuracy, with zero corruption. Now think about that. Imagine running a fort in the middle of the desert. You have 800 soldiers. You have grain coming in by boat from cities 500 miles north. You have meat being slaughtered locally. You have wine being shipped from temple vineyards. And every soldier needs a specific amount of food every 10 days without fail. How do you keep track of who has been fed and who hasn't? How do you stop one soldier from collecting food twice? How do you stop a quartermaster from stealing rations? In a world without paper, without printing, without modern record keeping, how do you do it? The Egyptians solved it with brilliance that was thousands of years ahead of its time. They invented a token system. Small wooden discs, each one carved by hand, each one shaped like a flat loaf of bread, the kind soldiers actually ate, and each token was inscribed with detailed information. The soldier's name, his unit, his rank, the exact amount of bread he was owed every 10 days, sometimes even his hometown in case the token was lost. These weren't random objects, these were government-issued, individually personalised military ID cards combined with food vouchers. In 1850 BC, and the system was beautiful in its simplicity. Here's how it worked. Every 10 days, on the official ration day, a soldier would walk to the fort's storage depot. He would carry his wooden bread token in his hand. He would hand it over to the quartermaster, the officer in charge of supplies. The quartermaster would inspect the token. He would verify the soldier's identity by matching the inscription to a master record kept on papyrus. He would check the date, he would check the unit, and only then would he issue the food. The token was returned to the soldier for the next ration cycle. If a soldier lost his token, he had to report it immediately. A new one would be carved. The old one became invalid. If a token showed up without its owner, it triggered an investigation. Theft, murder, desertion. The Egyptians took it that seriously. This is what completely blew the minds of modern historians, because here's what this system actually represents. The Egyptians had created a logistics currency before currency itself was invented. The first metal coins didn't appear in human history until around 600 BC in the Kingdom of Lydia in what is now Turkey. That's over 1,200 years after these wooden bread tokens were already being used. Think about that. The Egyptian military had a working system of supply vouchers more than 1,000 years before anyone in the world had even invented money. This wasn't food, This was infrastructure. This was the birth of military logistics as a science. And the food itself? Oh, this is where things get really interesting. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who travelled through Egypt and documented its military traditions, the daily ration of an Egyptian soldier was actually quite generous. We're talking about 5 minae of roast grain per day. That's roughly 6 pounds of bread, plus 2 minae of beef. That's about 2.5 pounds of meat, plus 4 cups of wine, every single day for every single soldier. Multiply that across an army of 50,000 men and the scale of the operation becomes terrifying. We're talking about 300,000 pounds of bread daily, 125,000 pounds of meat daily, hundreds of thousands of cups of wine, every day for decades, without computers, without modern accounting. And remember, every single ration was tracked, every single soldier had a token, every single name was recorded on papyrus scrolls in the fort's quartermaster archive. This was bureaucracy at a level the modern world wouldn't see again until the Roman Empire, 1,500 years later. And even then, the Romans didn't have anything as personal or precise as the Egyptian bread tokens. But here's the part most people don't know. Archaeologists didn't just find one of these tokens, they found dozens of them, buried at multiple Egyptian fort sites, scattered along ancient supply routes. Some were broken in half, some were nearly perfect, some had been worn smooth by years of being passed back and forth between soldiers and quartermasters. The wood was preserved by the dry desert air, surviving for millennia. And every token told a story. The story of a real soldier, a real man, a real life, fed by a real system, 4,000 years ago. And here's something almost nobody talks about. The bread tokens weren't the only thing the Egyptian military tracked. Each fort had separate token systems for beer rations, for wine, for oil, for sandals, for weapons. Soldiers carried different tokens for different supplies. Some tokens were made of clay, some of stone, some of bone. Each one represented a specific item, a specific quantity, and a specific timeline. It was a multi-currency military supply system, all running on hand-carved tokens. In 1850 BC, while most of the world was still figuring out how to bake bread in a stone oven. Now compare this to modern military history. The United States military didn't standardize ration cards until World War II. That was in the 1940s. The British Army began using formal ration tokens during the same era. Even the Roman legions, famous for their organization, didn't have anything as personalized as the Egyptian token system. They issued bulk rations to centurions, who then distributed food to their men. There was no individual tracking, no personal name on each ration, no traceable system. The Egyptians had achieved this 3,800 years before America, 3,000 years before Rome. And here's the wildest part, the system worked. Egyptian soldiers stationed in the deepest deserts of Nubia rarely starved. Their forts rarely fell because of supply problems. Their armies rarely mutinied over food shortages. Compare that to almost every other ancient army in history, where starvation, theft, and ration mismanagement were the leading causes of military collapse. The Egyptians had figured out something nobody else had. If you control the food, you control the army. If you control the army, you control the empire. The bread token wasn't just a piece of wood, it was the foundation of Egyptian military power. But like every great system, it slowly faded with time. As Egypt entered the New Kingdom and later the Late Period, the empire grew larger and more chaotic. The token system was modified, simplified, and eventually replaced with newer, more bureaucratic methods. By the time the Greeks conquered Egypt under Alexander the Great in 332 BC, the original wooden bread tokens were almost forgotten, buried in the sand, lost to history. Until modern archaeologists started digging in the 19th and 20th centuries. And here's what makes this story so haunting. Every modern military ID, every food stamp, every ration card, every supply chain tracker, every barcode on every box of military rations on Earth today can trace its DNA back to a small wooden disc shaped like a loaf of bread. Carved by an Egyptian craftsman, held by an Egyptian soldier, buried in the desert for 4,000 years. The technology has changed, the materials have changed, but the idea, that brilliant ancient idea of personalized government-tracked food distribution, started in Lower Nubia in 1850 BC. Egypt didn't just build pyramids, they built logistics. They built the systems that fed empires. They built the very concept of the military supply chain. And they did it before anyone else even imagined it was possible. If this story blew your mind, hit that subscribe button and join the Alternate Past family for more forgotten history like this. And tell me in the comments, could you have lived as an Egyptian soldier on 6 pounds of bread, 2.5 pounds of meat, and 4 cups of wine every day? Yes or no?